The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today, our panel will once again be answering questions from our listeners. Welcome back, everyone. And today we have a question from Stephen in Reno, Nevada. And Stephen asks, Kamala Harris is making the rounds on the late night comedy shows and podcasts, recently Howard Stern, for instance, and other social media platforms. Is this a good strategy for getting out her message? Should she do more mainstream media interviews? And if the panel were advising the vice president, what more would you suggest, or what we suggest of Vice President Harris do to gain more support?
First of all, thank you for the question.
Yes.
Appreciate your listening.
Is this a good idea? I think it is. I mean, I think that's the way, a lot of people consume their information now, is watching like Jimmy Kimmel and Seth Meyers and Stephen Colbert, because let's face it, it's pretty depressing, the news today, and it's nice to kind of like be able to laugh about it in the way that they present it. Same thing with like Comedy Central, The Daily Show. I think because in comedy, there's always a bit of truth. And that's something that I think that we always have to remember. It's the same thing like with fairy tales. There's always a bit of truth somewhere into a fairy tale. So I do. I think it's a good medium for her to be on and to make those. I am very disappointed that she was on Stephen Colbert the other night, and they were going to have a beer together, and she selected Miller High Life. I was kind of disappointed in that selection, but hey, teach their own. And yeah, the going on Howard Stern, as raunchy and raucous as he usually is, I was very surprised at really how well the interview went. I wasn't impressed with her on The View. I didn't think that went as well as maybe she would have wanted. But I mean, of course, hey, it all depends on who the other people that you're talking to. Like I said, I was very surprised with the Howard Stern interview. And yeah, I think that's where, because this is where people listen. People listen to podcasts. This is where they get their information from. And, we've gotten emails before that say that our podcast, the Nova Society, is its own little echo chamber. And okay, I mean, I could see where people might think that. I get it. But again, we try to do the best we can to give correct information. When we're wrong, we'll say we're wrong, especially when we make predictions, which we're usually wrong when we do predictions. But I mean, we do our best at giving factual informations, and it is in a lot of cases our learned opinions as to the topics that we're talking about. So yeah, I think that this is really a good strategy. It's the strategy of today. I think going on 60 Minutes, which is more mainstream, was a great idea. Yeah, I think that was an excellent idea. I think for Trump, that was an opportunity missed. But sitting down with somebody from CNN, sitting down with somebody from whatever news network you want to sit down with, you're only going to reach a certain number of people as far as getting that information out. And I think that going on these platforms, podcasts, things like that, I think it gives you a little bit more freedom to really express what your policies and ideas are.
Yeah, I was going to be very humble about this and suggest that it would not be a good idea for us to advise her campaign at all, because we are wrong so often in our predictions and our in the way we think of the world. It's just a befuddling place for us to be living in here. Um, but I did want to, so I'm not going to necessarily do that. I'm gonna say that I haven't watched many of these, or I've seen like a little bit of pieces of each of them as it comes in. And so I'm not a call her daddy. I'd never even heard of that before, right? I will say I did not know anything about it. I called my daughter and I said, "Do you subscribe to the Call Her Daddy podcast?" And she said, "No, but I know it's huge." And I looked it up, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's huge. I mean, this is a lot of young women listen to this podcast. I don't know if anybody else listens, but it's a lot of young women, and that's who she needs to get out and vote for her. And she did a really good job. Now, the part I will say I can help her campaign with is by bringing up some of the things that I don't think her campaign is bringing up, which I'll do in a minute. But you know, she's as we're getting into this last month, she is she is now taking on more interviews. As you noted, she was on Colbert, she's been on The View, Howard Stern, who, by the way, is a great interviewer. And I'm not a subscriber anymore, but I listened to him in his raunchy days, and I loved it back in the 80s. But he's kind of become a little bit, I think, less raunchy and more elder statesmanly like in his old age now. And he's a terrific interviewer. Um, and 60 Minutes, of course, which is the sort of, as mainstream as it gets. But look, if you look at that list, right? She's going on Univision doing a town hall there. She's got Gen Z women. She's got Hispanic voters. She has, coastal liberals, I suppose you would say, right? Who, people who watch Colbert, listen to Howard, boomers watching 60 Minutes, older people, I'm guessing, suburban women. And, it's a smart strategy. She's not going out there and speaking to a crowd of 10,000 people, most of whom apparently are being paid like Trump is, because it massages his ego. And he's even going, I heard, to Coachella this week or next week, which is really crazy because it's in California. He's got no chance of winning that that state. And she's reaching audiences that she needs to reach. And she's doing it where they are. She's meeting people where they are. And I'm very impressed. The one thing I'm not impressed with, I think, Mark, you just brought up, is some of her answers aren't as good as they could be. And I think that there's been a lack of the going for the throat that I would suggest, and that James Carville has suggested, right? You can't be too aggressive in politics. It really does work. And so I would be bringing up the Trump pardon the cop killer, serving life in prison without parole on his last day in office as a favor to his daughter or a friend of his daughter's. And how can you claim that you're a pro-police candidate if you're pardoning or commuting the life sentence, no hope of parole, of a cop killer, a drug dealer who killed a cop in a sting operation? I would bring up, some of the crazier things that his campaign stands behind, and go for the throat on it. And she does point out that he's a liar, which is great. But I think that everybody already knows that, and nobody cares. But there may be other things that are true that she's not getting to, and I would suggest that she begin to hammer him more hard on issues that people really care about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I agree with James Carville. What she's got to do is Trump is a fantasy. He's a cartoon character. And there's a mystique about his ability, such as he is a great businessman. And I would be pounding on but what about Trump Steaks? What about Trump Airlines? What about Trump University? What about, that Trump charity that got shut down? What about, you've got to kind of, as Scott said, go for the juggler a little bit. Democrats have always been very bad at that. I mean, in my lifetime, Democrats have not been really good at down and dirty politics. That was always, the Republicans were far better at that than the Democrats were. And I think she's got to really do a little bit more of that. Because, okay, everybody says, well, I don't know. I want to know what her policy is on the economy. She could explain that to you. She could go back to the Ross Perot days where he used to bring out and do those 30-minute infomercials, and he'd have all those charts and stuff up there. And he basically was explaining his economic policies to a 5-year-old. Now, that was all well and great. But for her to express her economic policies, it would take hours of times. And, she's only got a limited amount of time to be able to do these things in. So, yeah, people want substance. They want to have the feeling that the direction is the correct direction. Of course, there's people today that believe the direction the economy is in the wrong direction. I don't see how. I don't see how somebody says to me, I was better off 4 years ago than I am today. Really? I mean, I just can't. I just don't understand that answer, because it's not true. You're told, Fox News told you you're better off 4 years ago than today, where if you really sat down and looked at it, you're really not. So, you got to get past that. So the thing to do is you've got to start breaking down that myth, the mythology of Trump, of what what he's being presented as being, that he is not. And bring up those uncomfortable things like Trump University. Bring up you don't even have to bring up the legal stuff, because that's pretty much out there anyway. People either believe it was a witch hunt or whatever, but bringing up the fact that Trump Airlines doesn't exist anymore is a reality that nobody can deny. That Trump University doesn't exist is a reality. You can't deny it. If you want to, oh no, it still exists. Okay, go try to sign up for it. See how that works out for you. So starting to chip away at that false persona of this misogynistic charlatan. Pull back the curtain. For the Wizard of Oz, don't look behind the curtain. Ignore the man behind the curtain. That's what everybody in the Trump sphere wants you to do. They want you to ignore the man behind the curtain. And what Kamala Harris can really start doing today, and then you don't have to be, maybe not even Kamala Harris. Let Tim Walz do it. If there's somebody that could do it, like, in a funny and not vicious way, but vicious enough, let Tim Walz do it. That's what the vice president is for.
Yep.
That's the bulldog that you send out there. Let him go do it, and make him, pull back that curtain, Tim Walz. Show him in his underwear, and then everybody laugh about it. And let Kamala Harris be above the fray. Presidential, stoic, and all that. But I'd be sending Tim Walz after him in a heartbeat. That would be my, if I was to give advice, and of course we wouldn't because we're terrible at that. I would say sick Tim Walz.
Yeah.
If people relate to him.
I agree. Yeah, and Brooke, see if this resonates with you, because it really did for me. I think it was the best thing that she said on the campaign so far. She was criticized by the governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckleberry Hound Sanders, who, whatever her name is, I can't remember, who said that Kamala Harris doesn't have kids, and it's her kids that keep her humble at the end of the day. And Kamala Harris was asked about that, and she said, I think you have to. What she doesn't seem to understand is that not all of us are seeking to be humble. And it was a great answer. Like, this isn't the 1950s anymore. We're not here to support the husband, be the good mom to the kids, and cook the cookies and all that kind of stuff. That she's a powerful woman and smart enough to play with the big boys and beat them at their own game. And I think that's exactly what she's doing. I want to see more of that from her, where she turns it on them. And she's done a great job, I think, overall of that. I mean, Trump has tried to set these traps for her. She has not gotten into them, and she has kind of forced him to step in his own traps and look like a buffoon. So more to it, more like that. And I agree with Mark. Tim Walz needs to go out there and rip Trump for all of these things that he's saying, all the policies that he has that are going to hurt middle class people on behalf of the wealthy. And, that is the reality that people have to deal with.
Yep, I agree.
And I don't believe that Sarah Huckabee Sanders actually is humble. If she were humble, when she was Trump's press secretary or whatever it was, she always had this little smirk on her face that I associated with somebody who feels a sense of superiority over others. And just from her body language, this little slight smile that was inappropriate to what she was saying, and with what she's doing as governor with her state, she's not serving her people. That's not the actions, in my estimation, of somebody who actually is humble. I don't see any servant leadership there. I don't see any leadership at all. So I think that she needs to keep her mouth shut about being humble and about criticizing people for having children or not having children. That's none of her affair.
Let me give you another one. Trump had this bizarre thing where he said, "I'm going to protect you. I'm going to be the protector of women. You're not going to care anymore about abortion because it'll be where it belongs in the States, and the women can't go out and buy a loaf of bread without getting attacked, and I am going to be your protector." And Kamala Harris said, "I don't think the women of America need him to say he's going to protect them. The women of America need him to trust them." And I think that's a really, really good answer. And it messes him up, because all the crap that he thinks is going to land, he's not landing. And so what do you think about that whole, I will protect you thing that he did a week or so ago?
Oh, I think it's absolutely egregious. It treats women like second-class citizens, like property, as though women needed protection. I don't know what we need protecting from. Maybe other men.
Or him.
We need protection. I mean, what exactly are we needing protection from? That needs to be defined. And of course, he didn't say. I think women are perfectly capable of protecting themselves. And clearly, Trump is afraid of strong women, because a strong woman who is educated and capable doesn't need protecting from anybody. And so he's, I don't know. And just because abortion is turned over to the states, certainly doesn't mean that women don't need to think about it anymore. I think that women would think about it much more, depending on where they lived, and worrying about whether depending on who is elected, whether there's going to be a national ban, because regardless of what Trump says, he would veto any national ban or this or that, he has said before that there needed to be punishment for the woman, and other states have talked about putting women to death for the crime of abortion, and I just, so he just says whatever he says at the time that he thinks is going to get him elected, and I think he's a horrible human being, and I certainly wouldn't want him even near me or any of my family members, or even near my animals.
Okay. And I don't remember who it was, but there was a Republican, I believe it was a member of the House, it may have even been a U.S. senator, who this week said that biracial marriage should be a states' rights issue, which is the first warning that we have that they're going after Loving. And we kind of suspected that they would, and that they're going to, now they've got Dobbs, so and they're going to go after contraception, and they're going to go after mixed race marriages, and they're, it's this attempt to keep the white race pure and America purely white. And I continue to be amazed that people can say things like this out loud, but they do.
Well, I would think that Clarence, that was the one that entitlement that Clarence Thomas did not mention, because of course he is in a mixed marriage himself. He was talking about Obergefell and the others, but no, he did not discuss mixed marriage. But no, I did not. I was not aware of that statement. But it doesn't surprise me. It'll be interesting to see what Thomas's reaction is, because that touches on his own personal situation, which I imagine he's not going to like.
Unless he's tired of his wife.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Very interesting. Mark, did you have anything to add?
No, I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that's just her face, first of all. Sorry. And number two, when you mention humble, remember who her father is. The former governor, who there is no humility in him. So she's a product of her upbringing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Mike Huckabee, yeah.
Mike Huckabee. I mean, when you think about him, there's no humility involved in him whatsoever. And she's a product of that. And yeah, she doesn't only got that smirk, she's got that one eyebrow that goes way up all the time. It's sort of like Mr. Spock. It kind of goes way up. And I just think that's her face. And if she was a guy, I would not say this because she's a female. And that's not being, misogynistic or anything, but I would never say this of a female. But if she was a guy, for me, that face would be even more punchable than Mike Johnson.
Face like a frying pan.
Alrighty. So, well, thank you, Stephen, for your question, and I hope that we answered it. And thank you to all our listeners, and thank you to you both.
What was the question?
Huh?
What was the question?
Do we have any advice? And we basically said no, and we gave it. So if the Harris campaign calls us and starts complaining that we're giving advice, we didn't mean it. We just kind of got off on a tangent there. We're terribly sorry. And I will give you Scott's home address so you can go and see him.
Yeah, so we'll thank you both. We'll see you next
gotta get your friends to stop sending us emails in these podcasts.
That's correct. Yeah, that's pretty rough. So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.